Welcome back to Not Enough Projects. Today I've got a new one for you guys, and if you can't tell already, it's a Miata. Yep, another Miata. I know what you're thinking. But this is a 99 NB Miata. It's got a blown motor, so let's take a quick look around it and start digging into it. So I know basically nothing about the history of this car, based on the information that I could find in the glove box. It's been sitting since about 2011, end of 2011. Based on insurance and lottery tickets that I found in the glove box. So supposedly the motor has a rod knock spun bearing, and it looks like the motor's either been pulled before or they got 90% of the way there. So that makes it kind of easy for us, but we're probably going to be dealing with a bunch of lost bolts and stuff. Radiator and some other pieces like the airbox are in the trunk, but we should be able to just yank this out pretty easily. Overall, the car's pretty clean. You know, it's got dings and stuff. The paint needs cleaned up. We've got some dings and dents in the doors and stuff right here. Nothing too crazy. The top's trashed, of course. Interior's dirty because it's been sitting for what, 10 years. So not a huge deal. It's only got 147,000 miles, I believe, so pretty good for being a 99. It's a 5-speed. It's also got some sick wheels. Not exactly my taste. I don't know if anybody likes these, but you're welcome to have them if you want them. Tires have a date code of like 05, so this really didn't get driven much because the tires are actually in okay shape. Obviously they're dry rotted and we're going to replace them. Also going to change the wheels out because, ugh. Here's what we got in the back. We're going to be dealing with probably a lot of lost bolts and stuff, but no big deal. Car's clean underneath, no rust or anything like that, so I'd say it's a pretty good find. Let's start digging into pulling the motor. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do a very good step-by-step or anything because 90% of the work is done. So I'm probably just going to time-lapse it. You guys are going to watch. I think I'm going to pull the motor and transmission out as one piece. In these Miatas, the transmission doesn't stay in the car like a normal vehicle. It's connected to the PPF, and it's kind of tricky to just take the engine out. So I think we'll probably just be yanking both the motor and the transmission. I noticed there's already a bunch of bell housing bolts out, so that's kind of why I'm wondering if they took the motor out and set it back in, although that would be kind of weird. I think they just maybe got most of the way there. Alright, let's start digging away and get this thing out. Should be quick. So just a quick overview before I get into it too much. Obviously, you can see everything that's already removed basically has to come out to pull the engine. All the accessories are off of the engine. We're just leaving the power steering pump and the AC compressor in the car, which this car is AC, so that's a big plus. Also, all coolant lines need removed. The radiator should be removed. We're going to need to disconnect our fuel lines. I'm also going to remove the coil pack because it's probably going to get in our way when we go to tilt the engine up and pull it out. Although, you could probably get away with leaving it. We're also going to need to disconnect the clutch slave cylinder from the transmission. And what's probably going to be the biggest pain is getting the exhaust off. I think we're just going to remove the entire middle section, the downpipe from the exhaust manifold to the rest of the exhaust system. We're also going to have to remove the drive shaft, which is just held them with 4 nuts and bolts to the differential. We'll pull it forward, pull it out. We'll want to drain the transmission before just to make sure we're not making a big mess under the car. And then probably I'm going to remove the PPF, which is the frame that goes between the transmission and the differential. I think that's going to make our lives easier. You could probably do it and leave the PPF in, but we'll see. I'm going to try taking it out. I think it's going to make it easier for us. I'll take you into the car and give you a quick overview down there. Alright, so here's a look under the car. A little bit of a grease ball. That's okay. So here's the mounts that we're going to have to undo. These are the motor mounts. So we'll undo that on either side when we're ready to take it out. And then here's the PPF I was talking about. It stands for power plant frame, and it goes between the transmission and the differential. So I think we're going to pop it out all the way and just totally remove it, so it's not going to interfere with anything we're doing. And here's the mid pipe, or the down pipe, that we're going to remove. We're going to move that section all the way up to these bolts. It's going to be a real joy to get to that. We're going to have to undo all the wiring harness connections for the transmission, and also we'll have to go inside the car and remove our shifter. And like I was saying, to remove our drive shaft, we'll just take these bolts out, slide it forward into the transmission, yank it out to the side and pull it all the way out of the transmission. Should have mentioned this thing has some kind of bastardized, disgusting exhaust system going on. You can see it was done. Somebody welded it up blindfolded with a coat hanger. It's some like Nissan muffler that's not even centered on the car. Anyway, safe to say we're getting rid of that ASAP. So there's our quick general overview. Let's get to it and start pulling it up. Yeah, this isn't exactly step-by-step, obviously, but all of these are 10, 12, or 14, and that applies to pretty much the whole car. Alright, and we're just going to try to soak as much oil out of the turret housing as we can. We're probably going to spill some, but whatever. Fluid actually looks pretty good in there. Alright, so I think that's just about everything out of our way. So let's get the engine crane on there. Mazda was nice enough to give us a couple lifting eyes on either side of the engine, so that's going to make our lives easy. I ended up not taking off the coil packs. We'll see, we can take them off if we need to, but I think we can maneuver it so that we won't need to, but we'll find out. So I'm going to do one final sweep over, make sure there's nothing else connected. I'm just realizing I didn't do the fuel line yet, so we'll do that. And then we'll pop our motor mounts out. Alright, motor mount time, I guess. Alright, both nuts are out. That's what they look like. It's a nut and a washer. May end up needing to remove the hood, we'll see. Let's drop the transmission down now. Transmission's peeing out, so I'm gonna throw a pin under there. Let that go for a little bit. Gives us a good chance to look everything over. We're looking okay. Yeah, it's probably easier if you take the coil pack out, but I think we'll be alright. Fluid coming out of the transmission looks brand new. Not sure what that was. I didn't see anything hanging up. Oh, it's probably the starter falling, huh? Make sure we're still good. Yeah, I think we're totally free. May not even need to take the hood off, but I could be speaking too soon. Definitely need some more tilt. There you have it. Alright, that was pretty dang easy. I can't complain much about that. I mean, granted, a lot of the work was done for me, but, you know, really not bad. I mean, even starting from scratch, you should be able to get her done in an afternoon, no problem. Now we need to separate the transmission from the engine, which we're already missing 90% of the bell housing bolts. I think there's only 2 in there, so that'll be easy. We just got to pop those out, yank it apart, and then we'll have just the engine that we can get on the stand. Alright, let's get this bad boy separated. All the bell housing bolts are 17mm. Like I said, this thing only had 2 in there, and I don't think they ever took this out because the exhaust, it didn't look like it had ever been taken apart. So, I'm guessing they got really close and for whatever reason stopped. Who knows? So wait, there might have only been 1. Funny. Yeah, looks like it. There she goes. Looks like she got a little rear main leak or something. Not bad. Alright, let's pop the clutch off. Looks like it's held on with 14s. It's a good idea to do these kind of evenly. Clutch doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's worn, obviously, but yeah, there's some heat. So I mean, this is obviously going to get replaced. I mean, there's some meat left on it. It's pretty close to rivets. Just looks like a higher mileage clutch, nothing too crazy. May need to get the flywheel resurfaced with the heat spots. Alright, we'll also go ahead and pop the flywheel off before we put it on the stand, and also the separator plate that goes behind the flywheel, just because the stand is otherwise going to interfere with us taking it off. Smell delicious. Kind of like head bolts. And here's our pilot bearing. We're going to change that. It's a little actually chunky. And our separator plate's got this 10mm bolt here. And it also attaches to the dipstick / that ground cable. Okay, so on the 1.8, the oil pan is integral to the block. It's actually part of the bell housing, as you can see. So we'll probably put the engine stand on there with the support arms mounted to the oil pan bell housing holes, and we'll probably just take the whole top end of the engine off. Then we'll probably throw it on a bench and deal with the bottom end there, because there's actually only 4 holes up here, which would be fine, but these dowels are in there. So for now, we're just going to do the easy way, and we're going to have to take it off the stand later, but we can tear down the top end at least. Yeah, actually, let's just see how stuck in there those dowels are, because that'll make our lives easier so we don't have to do 2 more steps. Never mind, they are very stuck in there. Yeah, 3 out of 4 is pretty good. 75%. Up 4. And there we are. Teardown time. Alright, so let's start tearing into this thing. We're going to start by taking off the exhaust and intake manifolds, obviously, and then once everything on the outside of the engine is off, we can start digging into what really matters, which is the internals. Now, sometimes it's helpful to like individually baggy bolts and stuff, but if you've got a place where you can set stuff undisturbed, you can just you know, like throw bolts in there, and then we know that's a heat shield bolt. So staying organized is a big important thing when you're doing an engine rebuild, because obviously there's a ton of them and they all go to different places. So a lot of times it's pretty easy to figure out after you have some experience which bolt goes where, because a certain type of bolt is usually used for a certain type of application. But if you don't have to do any thinking and it's just easy, that's the best way to go. Hopefully we don't break any of our exhaust studs. It's always kind of a pain in the butt. But everything on this car so far has been 0 rust. So that's good. I mean, we don't really get rust around here, but exhaust stuff can still sometimes get a little seized in there. Okay, and we've got an EGR, is what I'm guessing this is over here. This might be kind of fun to take off, we'll see. We may just take those 10mm bolts there off. It's also helpful if you can thread nuts back on and not drop them on the ground, but thread them on and leave them, then you know for a fact they go exactly there. So we'll go ahead and start taking all of our wire harness connections off, and I think it'll probably just stay with the intake manifold. Now for the intake, I'm not sure if we're going to have to split it in half. So it looks like it's got a split there. Looks like we can get to everything from here. They're just 12mm. Okay, I think we might be free now. Oh, it looks like we got a support bracket between the intake and the fuel rail. So it looks like we got to disconnect our fuel line. It's got one of those plastic wire clips. We got a ground cable. We've got a ground wire hanging us up right here, and then a coolant hose going over to the water outlet. I think. Oh, we got another coolant line, it looks like. Didn't realize these things had oil coolers, but there you go. Alright, well that really opened up the situation for us. Now we just need to take our fuel rail off. It looks like the fuel rail also holds the wiring harness for the coils and the rest of the stuff that's still in the engine. So it looks like we're just dealing with some 12mm bolts and then a 10mm bolt, holding these wiring harness connections on this bracket to the valve cover. Like that. Looks like we've got these little spacers going like that. So we'll have to remember how they go. Intake gasket. Alright, so now I think we can actually just start digging into the engine internals. So we'll pop the valve cover off. That'll give us a good first look into the overall condition of the engine. Just held on with a bunch of 10mm. So this thing's been sitting so long, the PCV connections are filled up with mud dauber nest. Which, to be fair, that could happen in just a season, but... we got 12mm back here, it looks like. Actually, that's for the cam caps, so... might be it, yep. Okay, not bad. Not bad at all. We got a little bit of crust, but this is actually really a pretty clean engine. So we got some oil varnish, but I'm not complaining. That looks pretty good so far. Timing belt looks pretty good. Not that it matters on these. These are non-interference engines, so if the timing belt snaps, no big deal. You just got to put a new one in. Won't bend any valves. So let's start turning down the front of the engine. That way we can get the timing cover off, and then we can take the timing belt off and get our cams out. All right, so we got a little bit more wire harness and stuff. Looks like we've got a water. Looks like we've got a hardline water line that goes from the block over here that we're going to need to take off our water outlet and the crank and water pump pulleys. I don't think it's actually getting in our way. We can leave it on for now. But we will need to take off, I'm guessing this is the power steering pump bracket. Looks like it's got 14s holding it on. Got this collar in here holding us up, blocking the access to that bolt. So it might do it for us. Not quite. Just needed to step up. Okay, now we need to get, I think this is the AC compressor bracket, same deal. Looks like it's got a 12mm up front. Missed one more up in here. Now get our coolant passage. Go. Looks like we've got a crank sensor back on the front of the engine. But before we get that, it's probably just going to be easy to pop these pulleys out. I think that's our crank trigger, or crank sensor. Now we might as well get our crank pulley off. Harmonic damper. Looks like it's a 21. This is one where an impact is definitely a nice to have. Otherwise you gotta like thread rope down through one of the spark plug holes and turn it over. It's a huge annoyance, but with the impact it should just zip it right off. There we go. I think these are just held on there. Some of them, like American V8s are press fit, so you're gonna use a little puller. But this one comes right off if you don't drop it. And there is our timing pulley for the crank. pop our water pump pulley off. Wrap something around it to hold it. Maybe you have to just wedge. Strap wrench should do the trick for us. You can also use the old belt, maybe vice grips or something, but it's not like this is super crazy tight. We just gotta hold it. Okay, now we can start popping our cover bolts out. The plastic timing belt cover. Look like they're all 10 millimeters. We want to remember that we've got a wire harness bracket that goes into that hole. One more hidden in there. One more hidden in there. Alright, so now we need to go ahead and loosen our tensioner so we can pop the belt off. Maybe we'll just slide it off, honestly. Yep, okay. That's one way to do it. This timing belt could definitely be replaced. Doesn't look terrible though. Honestly, it's probably the original one, but who knows? No, Napa. So it's been replaced probably at least once. I think the spec is like 80,000 miles or something, so it was only due for one service. So it looks like we can actually just get to all the head bolts without taking the cams out. So we'll probably just take the head off as it is, and we can disassemble the head on the bench and take the cams out then. It looks like the head bolts are 12 point, or they may even be triple square. Let's see. Okay, so it looks like they're 12 millimeter 12 point. Now sometimes you can get these with the impact. It's kind of a good idea in my opinion, just use a breaker bar, because then you can feel if any are loose, because overheating an engine a lot of times will loosen the head bolts, and if they don't snap loose, then you know the engine may have been subjected to some kind of stress. So that's kind of how they should loosen. They should be pretty dang tight. And they should snap like that. Careful not to give yourself a hernia. That one didn't quite snap, but it was pretty tight. So I didn't notice anything glaringly obvious weird on those head bolts. And I'll just use the impact to run them out, because they're long, so saves a lot of labor. A lot of times, the impact won't even loosen them when they're fully tightened because they're kind of springy, so the impact just gets absorbed. More than likely, these are not reusable. I haven't checked, but most newer engines, you got to replace the head bolts every time you mess with them. But I cannot promise that's true on these. Alright, our head should be ready to come off now. Sometimes they get a little stuck on there, and we could have something holding us up. Bet you it's just a little stuck on there, so we'll just use a screwdriver to pry up a corner gently. Just break the steel a little bit. There we go. And up and off she comes. Missed a hose over here. Pop that off real quick. Got a hose from our oil cooler we gotta take off. Careful not to drop her head. And away she goes. Alright, so first look we have at anything meaningful. Kind of crusty, kind of weird carbony crust. Pretty loose stuff. But, I mean, nothing super concerning yet. Let's throw our crank bolt back in and rotate some. And actually, let's rock it back and forth and see if we can hear our rod knock. Yeah. Let me bring cylinder 4 up. Watch this. Cylinder 4 definitely has some issues. See how number 1's moving? And 4 moves later. I think that's where our issue is. But spinning pretty freely. Let's take a quick look at our bores. They actually look pretty good just on a cursory first glance. We'll clean them up and give them a rough hone to see whether we're going to need to take them to the machine shop or not. But so far, there is no feelable bore wear. Kind of hard to tell because we got carbon. So we'll clean up and get a little bit of a better idea. But so far, we're looking decent. Hard to say for sure though. Yeah, not happy. So we're gonna have to get this on the bench to actually tear it down the rest of the way. We can take the water pump off and the rest of the stuff in the front. We'll also go ahead and pop our motor mounts out. And we can take, I'm guessing this is oil pressure sensor and stuff out of our way. You know what? I didn't even check if it had oil in it. I'm guessing it's been drained, but we'll see. So we're gonna actually flip this around and make it a little easier on us. I don't know how much coolant's in here still. Whoa. Obviously I didn't tighten that up enough. Nope, there it is. I don't know why that's been electrical taped. Kind of funky. Get our dipstick out. And let's get all this junk off and out of our way. Looks like we got to take our spring off for a tensioner. There's that. We don't want to lose that. Yeah, it definitely needs replaced. It's got a bunch of 12mm bolts holding, I guess it's the inner timing cover portion onto the block, and the water pump. Yeah, so it looks like the water pump's actually the back side of the timing cover. Kind of interesting. There we go. There we go, nice open port for our water pump. Oil pump will probably take off on the block because we've got to get the oil pan off. Let's get a pan under, dump it over, and get all the coolant out. Alright, there we go. Pop this off. Alright, now we'll flip her around on the side, or actually maybe we'll set it on the deck, and then we can pop our oil pan off. It's pretty light for being an engine. Not going to say it's light though. Of course, all of a sudden there's tons of oil falling out even though I flipped it over on the... That's just awesome. I don't know where that came from. Alright, so we've just got a ton of 10mm bolts holding the oil pan onto the block around the perimeter. So we got these long ones all the way on the back. Alright, and more than likely, this is going to be fairly stuck on there from RTV, so we're going to need to pry it up with a screwdriver. Looks like right here we got a decent pry point. Double, triple check that we got all the bolts. Looks like we do. I'm going to get something a little stronger. Sometimes it can be tough to find a good place to pry on. So obviously you don't want to break it off anywhere. Getting the dowel on that side, we'll go from the other side now. Not sure exactly what's hanging us up. We're free all the way around the edges, so kind of feels like the pickup or something, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, let's pop our oil pump off. And that'll give us a little bit more of a complete picture into what we're dealing with. I haven't looked at the service manual. Sometimes it's kind of fun to just dive in and see what we're dealing with. Try to just figure it out. I believe that's it for the oil pump bolts. We need to pop our crank bolt out. May just need to do some snaking around. Might be some internal baffles that the pickup goes into. Okay, yeah, I see now. So the pickup does go back behind there, so you gotta remove the pump with the pan, it looks like. So we definitely got some metalage right there, back by number 4 like I was thinking. Set that aside. Yeah, we've got a lot of oil in there. Let's see if we can maybe heft it over the pan and dump it. You know what, I think we can just work like this and we'll unbolt all of the rod caps, set them behind, we'll unbolt all the mains, we can yank the crank out, and then we can pull the pistons out the top and hopefully make as little of an oil mess as we can. But we're probably going to make a gigantic mess, let's be honest with ourselves. So it looks like our rod caps are 14 millimeters. Start with our centers, I guess. It'd be good to check these by hand, but since we're not on a stand, it's going to be kind of hard to wrestle it loose since they're pretty dang tight. Before we pop them off, let's put some paint marks on it so we know which goes where. So this is 2, and that's front. This is 3, that's front. Okay, bearing stayed on the crank, that's not unusual. Push our piston down. Yeah, so we've got some major bearing wear. The crank is okay-ish, I'd say, but this is just from all the metal that ran through. You can see our bearing's pretty tired. It should kind of pop in there and stay. It's just loose in there, so make sure to note that. I'm sure 3 is going to be a similar story. Yep, bearing stayed. This one's a little better. It's got some spring to it still. See if we can spin the, well, see if we can spin the crank over without getting ourselves in trouble and hitting the old rods that we already took out. Okay, that's about all we're gonna get. I think it's kind of rough from the spun bearing, so. Alright, so mark number 1, go towards the front. Same deal, bearing stayed. I think they're all going to look pretty similar except for 4, which I think is where our problem is. Oh yeah, look at that. There's your problem. Yeah, this is going to need resize, no doubt. Look at what's left of that bearing. Whew. At least it didn't seize. Well, I don't know. It's still mostly bearing material in here. We'll see what the machine shop says. Because unfortunately on this one, there is not going to be any avoiding the machine shop. So our main caps, let's see if they're marked. Looks like they are. We've got 5. Don't see the mark on number 4. 3's marked. 2's marked. 1's marked. So I'll just do some dots just to be safe. Mains look pretty good. There's some bearing groovage, but overall not bad. At least number 1. Who knows what could be behind the other ones. Same story on 2. I should mention, you see the arrow here, that points towards front. You do not want to mix them up. That'd be bad if you do. And it's good that they're sticking in there pretty hard. You don't want that. Should be an interference fit. Okay. Cool. Now we got to get our rear main out. This is a newer style engine where we're dealing with a seal that actually bolts on there, a housing. And now we can yank our crank. And our pistons, which are completely chock full of oil, unfortunately. Making suction against the bench. It's gonna be messy. Oh, we got our piston squirters actually. You know, it may be easiest if we grab this, flip it, and we can take the bearings out the top, or the pistons out the top. Ooh, yeah, that rod is toasted. You guys probably can't see yet, but not happy. Heavy, okay. Oof. Alright. So we'll start number 1. Just push her out the front. Check for any crazy issues here. Do some scuffing. We may need to replace pistons, unfortunately. That's front. A little harder when you're doing the reach around. Yeah, we've got some scuffing from probably the contaminated oil, but may be okay. Whoops. Very unhappy rod. Alright, so on a little bit closer inspection of the cylinder bores, we can see we've got some fairly significant vertical scuffing on the sides of the bores, which is a shame because the rest of the bore is in pretty good shape. You can still see the crosshatch all around. That's probably from starving from oil. And the reason why number 4 probably went on the connecting rod bearing is because I think it's probably the last one to get oil, so everything else got it. Oil pressure was really low. That one went first. So more than likely this block is going to need bored, unfortunately. I mean, if you were in a really tight budget, you could probably hone that, and as long as you're not concerned about having an oil burner and you're not looking to really get it back to max performance, you could probably just run a hone through it and be okay. We're going to go ahead and probably get it bored because it's not going to be worth doing the work and doing the ultra budget when we can spring for the $300 or whatever it's going to be to bore this. But if you're really in a bind, you could probably just hone it and send it. You're just not going to have the best results, but it will run down the road. Obviously the crank, there's no saving that. It's going to need turned. So let's dig into the cylinder head and see what kind of wear we're dealing with there. Alright, so we're going to want a nice wide working area so we can lay everything out as it came off. All the valves, lifters, cam caps, etc. So first things first, we're going to pop all the cam caps off and pop the cams off. We don't need to take the sprockets off right now. We will when we clean everything up, but for now we'll just pop caps and lay them out. The caps are labeled. I'll show you. Let's pop this one off. Hopefully it shows up. You can see an E2, so this is exhaust number 2. And I don't see actually any kind of directional marking, so maybe I'll put paint dots on the front. So our biggest concern on this is going to be whether the lack of oil scored up all of our cam caps, because there's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, you can resize them kind of like rods, but the machine work involved in that is very expensive to say the least. So usually it's just worth it to get a replacement head or a remanufactured head. Now, the cam is under spring pressure, so when I account for that, kind of try to loosen them evenly so the whole thing pops up at once. You can see the metal on all of this from the rod. So unfortunately we may end up needing to, oh yeah. Hear that? Problem is all of this is aluminum, so any steel just totally wrecks it. So this thing is probably done for, honestly. It's really rough. Yeah, that one's pretty bad. This one feels actually okay. Hopefully you can hear how much smoother it is. And we can try to remove our lifter buckets. The easiest way is usually a magnet. Just like that. Yeah, I mean, got metal all over it from the magnet. Should have cleaned that. They're not bad. There's a little scuffy on the surface, but not the worst. So there's our shim. Okay, we got one stuck in there. Fairly normal. Go ahead and pop our other one off. Looks like water got in here. Same kind of story here, as you'd expect. A few good grooves in the cam. Not the best sign ever. These lifter cups are really hard, and they're also going to the aluminum head, so the aluminum a lot of times will kind of suck up the contaminants. And these are hard enough that they don't get scuffed up by them. I mean, you can see wear, but this isn't super unusual to see in a higher mileage motor. Alright, so now we can actually pop the valves out. I find when you're disassembling, the fastest way to do it is to get a socket with magnets in it and throw some paper towel in the combustion chamber, just like this. Just like that, to keep the valves from hitting the table. And you want a socket that's about the diameter of the retaining cap. Let's turn this so we can see it a little better. So the diameter of the socket fits over the valve stem and the keepers, and it's just going to be on the valve retainer. And when we hammer it down, the paper towels will stop the valves, the retainer will keep going down, the keepers will pop out, and then the magnets that I have inside here will grab the keepers. So That's the fastest way I found compared to having to use the big clamp and pull out all the keepers. Sometimes it takes a few whacks, but here's our keepers. They're all the same, so you don't need to really keep them separate. Then we have our retainer and spring. Now if you're tearing down a head and you're going to do a valve job and actually grind the seats and the valves, then it doesn't really matter. But if you're just trying to check them and then you might end up just kind of lapping them and putting them back together, it's a good practice to keep the valves all where they were. And you can see all this shiny stuff on my finger? That's all from the oil. So now flip our head up. Our valves should come out. Now the exhaust valves generally wear a lot more than the intakes because they're subjected to a lot more heat. And the valves that wear the most are the center-most exhaust valves because they have the most heat accumulate versus these ones which can dissipate heat off to the cooler sides. So when we're checking guide wear, generally the center exhaust ones are going to be the highest wear. This seat doesn't look terrible, if it'll focus. There is some pitting. It's not the worst I've seen. But I mean, it's an 140,000 mile head with some trauma to it, so. It does feel like our guides are pretty worn. So I'm just testing for the wiggle. There's going to be some, just because there has to be clearance, but it does feel kind of excessive. So we're more than likely going to be better off just buying a new head, a remanufactured head, because the machine work involved in all this a lot of times exceeds what a remanufactured head costs. Now you got to be really careful with remanufactured heads. I've had a lot of trouble with them in the past. I always like to have them checked out at the machine shop, or if you have the measuring equipment, you can measure everything yourself and take them apart, because there's a lot of shoddy stuff that goes on in the remanufacturing land, especially if you're going for the bottom of the barrel ones. Like I've had stuff like the heads had incorrect guides just slapped in them, so it just straight from the gate burned tons of oil. So that's the kind of stuff you gotta be watching out for. If you want to be totally in the clear, you can buy a reman through your machine shop a lot of times, and they'll guarantee everything, so you kind of get a double warranty. Hey, look. Looks like this head had, you can't quite see, had these kind of gimmicky foreground strap spark plugs. Not like that does anything. Another kind of old school test for the guides is you actually put your valve back in the guide. And you want the guide to be dry. Then you put your finger over the top of the guide and you pop out. And you hear how it kind of has a pop? The old school way is if it pops, you're good. But this is a pretty weak pop, I can tell you that. And you'll also feel suction build up. A good head, if you pull it off, it really pops. And also this is oily, so you want to do it dry. But yeah, the guides are definitely worn. Now, if you were in a total bind and you really needed to do it on a budget, could you reuse this head? Yeah, probably, but it's kind of not worth the effort if you got the means to either get the machine work done on it or get a good remanufactured head, because you're doing all the work, you might as well go the full way. Looks like somebody's been into this engine before, because there's actually copper coat on the gasket. That spray stuff, which you don't need on new engines. you can see we've got some weird buildup on this cylinder number 3, especially on the second exhaust valve. That's like a significant amount of buildup. So something was getting into the cylinder. Probably some oil. So unfortunately our head is pretty toast. I'm going to take it to the machine shop. They're going to look it over and see if it's fixable. If not, they can get one for $750, which isn't exactly cheap, but it's going to be better than having to redo the job, because this head is pretty beat just from wear and also additionally with all the metal that's circulating around in it. So let's go ahead and prep the block for the machine shop so we can get that sent off. Alright, so we're going to want to completely disassemble this. I went ahead and popped the oil filter off. We're going to want to take the oil cooler off, just because you want to send as little stuff to the machine shop as you can. So I don't know the exact metric size, but it looks like 1 1/8 fits on here. I think that's, what, a 27 or something? 28? This is a little tight on there, but it'll do it. And we'll just run that off with the impact. Make sure we get our socket free. There we go. Alright, and then I also like to knock all the core plugs out. So I'm going to try to flip them if you can. These ones are being stubborn. Trouble is on these, the water jacket is pretty shallow, so the core plug is running up against the side of the cylinder, so gotta kind of mangle it a little bit to get it to flip around so we can grab it. There we go. This one should be a little easier. So see, you gotta kind of bend it to get it to fit through. The front one we can probably just get through the massive water pump opening. There we go. So that should be just about completely bare for us. Now we'll take her on down to the machine shop. I was hoping we wouldn't have to bore, but unfortunately, just because of the oil starvation, there is some scuffing. So it likely is going to need bored, but if your cylinder was okay, and you can check that there's no ridge, if it catches your fingernail and needs bored, this one feels great, honestly. There's not any noticeable step at all. So if the scuffing wasn't there, we could just hone this thing and send it with some new rings. And if that's your case, if you're also working on one of these BP engines, then just give her a good hone and throw some rings on, and she will be just fine. But yeah, this one needs a little bit of work. Hopefully you didn't spin a bearing if you're also working on one of these.